China was involved in the First World War. Very little of you have known that, but China in 1914 has barely been able to stand up on its feet, just right after the National Revolution, when Sun Yat-sen overthrew the Qing imperial dynasty. And the country was still in a turmoil. It was shabble, nothing to speak of, there's no national treasure. But still, in 1917, China formally declared war on Germany. And European allies let China do so. Why? Because at that time, one of the best run colony in China was Qingdao. It's a big city in Shantung area, which was run by Germany. There was a German colony. By having China join the Allied in the European theater, the Allied was able to make sure that, that Germany was not able to siphon off the assets from its Chinese colony back to support its operation in the European theater. And although China has nothing to do, there was thousands of miles away from Europe, was let in on the First World War. Now, it's very, very important. In fact, China's participation in the First World War was not only a defining moment in modern Chinese and world history, but also the beginning of China's long journey towards international cooperation. And it was the First World War and the Paris Peace Conference in which China participating as an equal in the first time in modern history, learning how to engage with the international system, ideas, forces, trends, and collaborating with other nations in maintaining world peace and stability. But this is not the most important part of the story. The most important part of the story is in 1918, in the Versailles Treaty, that China, as part of the victors, was treated as an equal sitting in the winning party's platform. But to its dismay, Shantung, the Qingdao colony, which rightfully belonged to China, was given to Germany, which was defeated. But after the war, it was not given back to China. It was given to Japan. Now, what that had happened has led, come on, listen to this, has led to the May 4th movement in 1919 in Beijing, which started as a student movement against Japanese, against the nationalist government, because it was weak and not being able to stand up to the national interests. And that began as a student movement, and then expanded into a youth movement, extended into a Chinese intelligentsia movement. And then it was at that time, and after the May 4th movement in 1919, that the intelligentsia throughout China started looking for another ideological paradigm. And they looked at Marxists. And that led to the formation of the Chinese Communist Party in 1921 in Shanghai. Without the First World War, without this humiliation from the Versailles, I think China would not have trotted down the path of its modern Chinese history, and the rest is history. Well, I think this is only part of probably the best kept secret in modern Chinese history, that China has something to do, and a lot to do with the First World War, and actually modern China has a lot to thank the First World War for that. Well, let's come back to the theme of the conference. I think, well, I can speak a lot about what happened with the scenario that Stevens had painted, and which was a quite accurate depiction of what's happening in the world today. But I think it's more befitting to a Hollywood film script. I think you are up next for a nomination of the Academy Award besides the Pulitzer Award. Well, joke aside, I think the crux of the question that every one of you burning to ask is what had been asked last year at the turn of the year by Margaret Mamillion. Let me find her paper. Margaret Mamillion was a granddaughter of Lloyd George. Is now teaching at Oxford. And in December 14 of 2013, just on the eve of the 2014, she wrote a very illuminating article and was posted on the Brookings Institute's website, which was very influential and very illuminating as well. But the question she was addressing, and probably the question that every one of you were burning to ask, was, does China's reemergence as a dominant economy and world power for the first time since the 1400s threatens a new world war? So with this, recapitulate what happened in Europe for the first in the First World War. Well, her answer, her conclusion, was quite possibly. And that was followed by another articles in The Economist and also by other authors, and for example, the Cold War historian Anne Applebaum and other people like Walter Russell Mead of Bard College. Also, they also wrote on the same thing, and the conclusion was quite similar. It was quite possible. But I would venture to argue that things have changed since 100 years ago. We have heard last evening from Jeffrey Sachs that the demographies have changed for the last 100 years. I took down some notes. Okay, 100 years ago, Africa, there was only 2 countries, and all the others were colonies. But now today, 100 years later, Africa consists of 55 nations, 1/3 of the world's nations into Africa. Europe, 100 years ago, 50% of all nations were in Europe. They represent 23% of the world population. And now it's only 10% of the world population. Whereas the United States, 100 years ago, had only a population of 90 million, is now over 300 million. Demographics have changed. China has grown from a small country of 400 million now to 1.36 billion people. The second is the economy achievement has also turned the table around. Economic achievement is important, but now China is the second largest economic aggregate of the world. But being a big economic power does not equate to a world power. Let's look back to 100 years ago when China was challenged, very much challenged, by the United Kingdom, by Britain at that time, at the First Opium War in 1840. China's, at that time, the GDP was 1/3 of that of the world. It was double that of Great Britain, and China was defeated. Then again, in 1894, in the Sino-Japanese War, China's GDP was 3 times that of Japan's. China was defeated by Japan. So having a strong economy, having a big GDP does not guarantee you power. There's much more than the power. It's what constitutes in the GDP that's important. And China's GDP is made up of textile, silk, porcelain, teas, jeans, tennis shoes. Whereas in other countries, the GDP is made up of tanks, airplanes, motors, cars, hardwares. So the second point I ventured to discuss with you is that economic power does not equate to world power. And as a matter of fact, China was very far from being a world power at this point in time. Besides having a big economic aggregate, on the other fronts of let's say, a world forum, for example, the number of patents, the number of research and development investments, publications, scientific journals, soft power, cultural power, so forth. China is still have a long way to catch up. Okay. The third point I want to point out is that the cost is too high for a total world war. And if we can all look back, what happened at the end of the First World War, I don't think any of these people called the wars would ever indulge themselves in the war. And more than 10 million people were killed in Europe. Civilization was ruined. The Kaiser was gone. Austro-Hungarian Empire dissolved. The Tsar was overthrown by the Bolsheviks. France bled for a generation. And England was shorn of its flower of this youth and its treasure. And besides that, we have a nuclear deterrence at this moment, which was not present at the First World War. And this is what Joseph Nye said was a crystal ball. And it is something that if you push on the button, I mean, everybody was just going to have to, say his last prayer. And at this present time, both the United States, Russia, and all the major nuclear power, if they pull the warheads together, was able to destroy the world about 1,000 times over. We certainly don't need that many warheads, but we're keeping them there to keep the peace. That's what we were told. So in order to have a overall type of a total war commitment will involve the entire continent, involve many, many countries, I think is quite unlikely. And third, and also, the media is different. 100 years ago, telegraph was only used for very important transmission of information, and most people write letters. And information was propagated through newspapers and journals. But today, everybody have a smartphone. And today, the smartphone penetration of the world is 91%. Meaning 91% of the world's population have at least one mobile telephone. And with that, the information, technology has served its purpose in propagating the political message and also the real world situation to all the citizens. And it's not so easy to, for any dictators or any rulers to call the shots and without really having the people to support it. And also throughout the world now, the democratic system and making the decision to go to war, very complicated, and also have to go through the public consultation and also have the public buy-in in order to have the war be implemented. So in order to have a total war, I don't think it is possible at this time. Also, we have many new channels of foreign relationships, and we have many supranational platforms for formal and informal dialogues, the UN being one, and there are also others. And for example, in South Asia, there's ASEAN, and there's the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Platform. There are many, many such platforms that information can be exchanged, and also for other dialogues to occur. And I don't think we'll have to rely solely on formal stance and positions. And lastly, and the last 2 points I want to raise is that today's world is multifaceted, has a diversity of involvements. And security, national security, does not only mean military security. Security can take on different perspectives and contents, such as economic security, information security, social security, cultural, digital, health, food, water, and other unconventional securities. And also, mind you, remember the color revolutions. And so there's not necessary really to go front on with another nation and just to conquer them or suppress them or really do something. There are all sort of ways. And interactions among countries can take on many different more dimensions and many different more arenas. But lastly, is our biggest enemy is not our opponents on Earth. Our biggest enemy is climate change. is Mother Nature. Mother Nature is walking away from us, and we have to find a way to get it back to support our next generation and next generation. And this is something we have to work together. It is something like the nuclear deterrence. But nuclear deterrence is over a push of a button and happen immediately. But climate change and sustainability is something that gradually and insidiously erode away our potential to support ourselves. And this is something that we have to face together, not as a nation, but as a generation of people. That's what I want to end by saying that although we have different pasts, but we have a common future to face. Thank you.